We're moving on to our next nutrient, which is fat. Fat is a nutrient that is made up of glycerol and fatty acids. It's sometimes called a triglyceride, and it does have a lot of functions. Fat's functions include carrying and transporting fat-soluble vitamins. It's used to protect organs. There's a layer of fat around every organ and right beneath the layer of skin to keep us insulated. It's also the most concentrated source of energy in the body. We get 9 calories for every gram that we consume of fat. And very important is that it maintains the neurological and cognitive functioning in the human body. So it's very important for the brain and the central nervous system to be able to function. In terms of nutrition, we do use fat for energy. So all of our activities come from a combination of carbohydrate energy and fat energy. So we do have to consume it for low intensity activities as well as maintaining the central nervous system. Fat has 9 calories per gram, so it is a little bit more than double the amount of energy and calories we get from a carbohydrate. Our daily intake should be no more than 20%, but we have to make sure that we eat fat. It is a very important nutrient. I like to say that fat is an excellent source of energy as long as we consume the right types of fat. Most of our fat needs to be a particular type called the polyunsaturated fat. We want to limit the amount of saturated fat and avoid all types of trans fat, which is a processed fat. There are various types of fat, and just with other nutrients, there's good and bad types of fats. So there are 3 types of fat that we're going to study. That's saturated fat, unsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. Those are 3 natural types of fats. Any one of those could be processed and turned into something called a trans fat. And that processed trans fat is something we want to avoid at all costs. Before we focus on trans fat, let's talk about the 3 natural fats that are found. The first one being saturated fat. When I think of the word saturated, I think of solid, because saturated fat is solid at room temperature. Saturated fat comes from animals, so any products, food products that are from an animal would contain saturated fat, and that includes the meats. Any kind of meat would have saturated fat in with it, as well as dairy products such as milk, yogurt, ice cream, cheeses, that all contains saturated fats. The second type of fat is unsaturated fat, and those are liquid at room temperature. They're moderately healthy to eat, a little bit healthier than saturated fats, the unsaturated sometimes are called monounsaturated. These come from plants, olives, and various types of vegetable oils. The healthiest type of fat, the good fats that you've heard of, are the polyunsaturated fats. These are, if we were to eat 20% of our diet from fat, these are the ones that most of the fat should be. Polyunsaturated fat comes from vegetables and fish, predominantly, especially sea vegetables, and that's how the fish get it, because they eat those sea vegetables. There's 2 kinds of polyunsaturated fats, the omega-3 and the omega-6 fatty acids. Of those, the healthiest ones to eat are omega-3s. Maybe a little bit harder to find in the diet if you're not eating fish, some vegetable oils, or it is also found in nuts and seeds. But it's really important to try to get at least 1 serving of the omega-3s from fish, nuts, seeds, or some vegetable oils each day. We've just learned about 3 types of natural fats, the saturated, the unsaturated, and the polyunsaturated. The healthiest of these are the polyunsaturated. The one we want to limit is the saturated fat. It is okay to have some saturated fat, like butter or a little bit in our meats, some dairy products, but we don't want to have all of our fat every day coming from that saturated grouping. The healthiest form are the polyunsaturated fats, and from the slide you can see that there's 2 kinds. The omega-3 fatty acids help reduce inflammation, and the omega-6 fatty acids tend to promote inflammation. I don't want you to think that the omega-6 are bad fats to eat. Know that we should consume both the omega-3s and the omega-6s, but what's happening in America right now is that Americans are consuming more omega-6s than the omega-3s. There are some people that virtually don't consume any omega-3s whatsoever. We want to make sure we're consuming both types, and I'm going to show you a slide coming up that has foods with these polyunsaturated fats in them. Once again, the best type of fat to consume are the polyunsaturated, and of the 2 types of polyunsaturated, the ones we want to focus on getting in our diet are the omega-3s. And on this slide, I show you various options to get the omega-3s. If I was to pick a few foods that are very high in this that we could incorporate in the diet, it would be flax seeds. Something that you could perhaps add to your breads, cereals, oatmeals in the morning. Some people add it in their smoothies. Another food would be fish or the sea vegetables, because that's how the fish get them in the first place. They'll be eating the algae and the plankton, and then it gets within the fish themselves. The colorful fish have more, so we're thinking about salmon, it's pretty and colorful, tunas, mackerels, trout, the fatty fish. But there's some other sources, perhaps that if you're not a fan of fish or don't know how to get the flaxseed, there's a few other things. You could get it fortified in food, so it's added in to eggs or butter or sometimes even cheeses. And we can also get it in some nuts and seeds. Another source, although not the highest source, but we can get it from dark green leafy vegetables. In case you hear the word alpha-linoleic acid, ALA, just know that that is something that's converted into omega-3s in the body. So if a food item lists in its ingredients that it has ALA or alpha-linoleic acid, just know that that's omega-3s. So why is it so important to eat those omega-3s that come from our fish, our flaxseed, our dark green leafy vegetables, nuts and seeds? Well, within the omega-3s, they have two fatty acids, EPA and DHA. Both of those are very important for our central nervous system. They help build the brain and central nervous system when we're young, when we're babies and kids, but also as adults it helps maintain the integrity of our central nervous system so that we could think clearly, so that we could be healthy and not have some problems with depression, dementias, things like that. So individuals who have a diet with at least one serving omega-3s each day most likely will be able to support the functioning of their central nervous system and have less risk of any type of dementia or depression. Research has shown that consumption of omega-3 fatty acids reduces inflammation to help lower chronic diseases such as heart disease, cancer, depression, mental illness, and arthritis. It's definitely vital to maintain the nervous system and also to improve our moods and to maintain the functioning of the brain, the central nervous system. And I have a link there for you to learn more a little bit about how the ingestion of omega-3 fatty acids can help prevent diseases. You could click on this link or copy it into a browser to see a slideshow on how to shop for foods that contain omega-3 polyunsaturated fats. So let's contrast the different types of polyunsaturated fats. We just talked about the omega-3s coming in fish, flaxseed, dark green leafy vegetables, seaweeds. Let's look at some foods that omega-6 is contained in now. And as you can see, these are foods that are eaten more so in the Western diet here in America: meats, poultry, wheat, eggs, and vegetable oils. Vegetable oils do contain a combination of omega-3 and omega-6s, so it's just which type has different amounts of each. What is happening is that Americans are consuming more omega-6s than omega-3s, so that's going to promote more inflammation in the human body. We need to counterbalance the ingestion of omega-6s with omega-3s so that we're getting at least, if not an equal amount of both, at least one serving omega-3 for every 2 servings of omega-6 we consume. So try adding in a little bit more foods with those omega-3s into the diet. Like the omega-3s, the omega-6s also will play a role in the prevention of diseases, mainly the heart disease, the depression, and the central nervous system. In ancient days, individuals were eating lots of animals that ate healthy sea vegetables and healthy grass, or they were actually eating the sea vegetables and grass themselves, and those things contained a lot of omega-3 fatty acids. Fast forward to today's society, we're eating a lot of processed foods. We're eating some animal meats that have less than a natural diet. Perhaps they're just eating spent grains or genetically modified corns. So they're not having a healthy diet as they used to in the ancient days. And what's happening is the ratio of omega-6s is much higher than the ratio of omega-3s in today's society. If we consciously made an effort to eat a little bit more omega-3s, we would probably see a reduction in some of the heart diseases, in some of the central nervous system problems as well. So again, remember, try to have a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s 2 to 1, if not within the range of 4 to 1. So for every 2 servings of omega-6s, have at least 1 serving of omega-3. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder with osteoporosis, diabetes, cancer. But the imbalance of these, if we're only eating omega-6s, seems to be leading to some of our health problems in our society. Thus, I have the slide stating do not consume any trans fat, because any amount will increase the risk for heart disease. If you want to identify trans fat, we're going to look for the words partially hydrogenated and then the type of oil. And typically, right now, it's soybean oil. What companies are doing is they're using genetically modified soybeans, and they're creating a processed fat from that, and we're calling it partially hydrogenated soybean oil. They're putting it in different types of cookies, crackers, boxed processed foods, because it's going to act as a preservative, and it's going to allow that food to stay fresh for longer periods of time so that the companies can sell it for longer periods of time. So it really is about the company making money. If they put a healthy fat in it, it would probably rot or spoil quicker. So they're putting this processed trans fat in it to make it last longer so they can make money for longer periods of time. Look for it, students, on the ingredient lists of foods. Look in your house, or when you're at the grocery store, check. Let's say you're going to buy a box of cookies. There's going to be plenty of cookies with ingredients that have trans fat, but there's going to be some cookies that you could buy at the store that do not have trans fat. The ones with trans fat will probably cost less than the ones without the trans fat in them, but it's a matter of your health. We want to try to be healthy. Then we're going to pick the ones that do not contain the partially hydrogenated oil. What we know is that if we consume trans fat, it's going to decrease our good cholesterol, and it's going to increase our bad cholesterol, which then directly will lead to heart disease. I've got a couple pictures there of foods that may contain trans fat. Again, any of these options, you could probably find crackers and potato chips and different types of processed food without the trans fat. But look at the ingredients. If it's a cheap food, look and see if it has the partially hydrogenated oil in it. And sometimes that is found in flavored potato chips. It's virtually in all types of frostings. Boxed cake mix, margarines. Some might not have it, but most margarine, it's all hydrogenated oil. So check those things out when you're at the grocery store. If you want an eye-opener, click on this link and or copy it into your URL. There's also a link for it within Blackboard. But this talks about an individual who got a hamburger from McDonald's and didn't put it in any refrigeration or preservatives on it, and it lasted, I believe it's 4 or 5 years now, and it looks exactly the same as if it was day one. What's happening is that there's things in that burger that act as preservatives to make it appear fresh, although it's 4 or 5 years old. Trans fat and high amounts of salt will do that. In lots of our fast foods, there are very high amounts of sodium. We'll talk about that later this semester. But also they put the trans fat in there, and even a little bit amount of trans fat or partially hydrogenated oil will act as a preservative and allow the company to sell maybe this hamburger for many, many days on end. I don't think any of these stores are selling it for 4 or 5 years, but you can see that it just doesn't break down, and we're ingesting all those processed foods and chemicals into your body when you eat those things. Okay, so we're moving on to cholesterol now. Just know that there's 3 types of fat: saturated, unsaturated, polyunsaturated. Companies are also processing natural fats, and that would be called a trans fat. But we're moving on to something now called cholesterol. And cholesterol has a lot of functions in the human body. It makes cell membranes. It helps form our brain and central nervous system. It helps synthesize hormones. But for our cases in nutrition, we want to talk about how cholesterol carries fat around the body. So I like to think of cholesterol as a little suitcase. And the cholesterol has to surround the fat and carry it through the bloodstream. The fat won't be able to move through the blood without it. So one thing we have to think about is the more fat we consume, the more cholesterol we need to carry it around. So one reason to have a lower fat diet, maybe no more than 20% of our diet being fat, is to minimize our cholesterol levels so that we don't have too much of this, which in turn might clog up our arteries. So for our beginning discussion on cholesterol, know that it has many functions, one of which is to carry fat around the body. We have 3 types of cholesterol. We have high-density lipoprotein, also known as HDL, low-density lipoprotein, known as LDL, and very low-density lipoprotein, known as VLDL. And looking at this slide, start to think, which one do you think is the good cholesterol? Which one do you think is the bad cholesterol? Of the 3 types of cholesterol, the good one is the high-density lipoprotein, the HDL. I remember that it's the good cholesterol because high, the H in high means happy. It's our happy cholesterol. The good cholesterol will carry the fat to the liver for elimination. So the good cholesterol does not get blocked or plaqued up in our arteries, and it actually eliminates fat from the body. So the only way to get good cholesterol in your body is to exercise. We can't necessarily eat good cholesterol, but what happens is cholesterol comes from either foods we eat or from our liver. Our liver could make cholesterol. If we exercise, our liver typically will make happy or high-density lipoprotein, the happy or good type of cholesterol. If we don't exercise, we're going to make the bad cholesterol from our liver. If we eat cholesterol, it's all going to be bad cholesterol. So we want to eat foods low in cholesterol, but also know that what our activities of our daily life will also impact what type of cholesterol your liver is making. If we exercise, we're making the happy stuff. So on to our bad cholesterol, and the bad cholesterol is the low-density lipoprotein. I remember it's bad because L, to me, low, the L in low stands for lousy, so I consider low-density lipoprotein lousy or bad cholesterol. And what happens with the LDL or the VLDL is this cholesterol picks up the fat from the body and it takes it around the body for a joyride. It just circulates the body, never leaving. And at times it will get clogged up in our arteries. So the bad cholesterol is the one that's going to be causing our plaque and blood clots within the vessels themselves, which could potentially lead, well, it is heart disease, but will lead to heart diseases. And I just want to comment quickly again, the VLDL is also lousy cholesterol, or the bad kind. So the HDL is the happy stuff, that's good. The LDL or VLDL are the bad cholesterol or the lousy kinds. I do recommend that every year adults have a blood test so they can check their cholesterol readings. Our total cholesterol should be less than 200. But you also want to have a lipoprotein profile breakdown, or you want to see the numbers of how much HDL versus how much LDL you have. We want the happy cholesterol or the good one to be higher than 40, and we want the lousy cholesterol or the LDL to be less than 100. So when you get your total cholesterol, also ask for a lipoprotein profile to see where you're at. The happy cholesterol will clear out your arteries. It will take the fat to the liver for elimination and get rid of any of those blood clots. But the LDL is the one that actually clogs up your arteries. That's what forms the plaque. So we want to minimize the LDL. Now, how do we get high amounts of HDL? Really, the key is exercise. We have to exercise so our liver will make HDL. If we're not being active, we're not exercising, typically our liver will make LDL. There are a few other factors that would cause your liver to make more LDL or lousy stuff, and that's genetics. Also stress, high amounts of stress, mental stress, physical stress, that will cause higher amounts of LDL to come out of the liver. And then there are certain drugs, both illegal or prescription drugs, that could increase the levels of LDL. So you got to watch on the side effects of medications as well. If we want to have good cholesterol, key is to eat healthy, to exercise, and then to minimize the things that would cause us to have high amounts of LDL, which would be stress, certain types of drugs, even smoking will cause higher amounts of LDL. And eating bad types of fats will also increase the LDL, because we know if we eat foods that contain cholesterol, it is LDL. And I mentioned that, where does our cholesterol come from? We could get cholesterol from food, and that would be LDL. We get cholesterol from our liver, and we have to ask ourselves, is our liver making more HDL or more LDL? And it really is a matter of genetics and lifestyle. Some families will be very good with their HDL in terms of cholesterol creation. A lot of families, they'll make high amounts of HDL. But on the other hand, genetically, there are some families where they're making a lot of LDL. And that's when we have an issue where we have genetics causing high cholesterol. But in any manner, our lifestyle, in addition to genetics, will impact the cholesterol. If we're exercising, typically we'll make more HDL. But if we're under high amounts of stress, if we're smokers, if we're drinking too much alcohol, if we're eating too much fatty junk foods or fast foods, our liver is going to make the LDL. We can limit the amount of cholesterol we intake from foods to no more than 300 milligrams a day. Cholesterol is going to be found in any type of food that has saturated fat. So anything that comes from an animal is going to have that cholesterol. Outside of fish, any animal product, dairy product, or things made from dairy products, including the bakeries and icings, butters, that's all going to have cholesterol. So check your labels, but we want to try to limit it to no more than 300 milligrams of cholesterol per day. If we have a high amount of LDL in the human body, then that's when this plaque begins to form. And you can see on this slide, the clearer artery is when we're born, and it has a lot of room for the blood flow with oxygen and nutrients to get through. But if we have a lifestyle or genetics that cause an increase in LDL or the lousy cholesterol, you can see it starting to accumulate within the artery themselves, and that's what's going to cause something called atherosclerosis or blockages in the arteries. This could lead to heart attacks, it could lead to strokes, it could lead to other types of cardiovascular disease. So we want to minimize the amount of LDL and maximize the amount of HDL in our body. So how do we get good cholesterol? How do we get rid of the bad or lousy cholesterol? Well, focusing on increasing HDL by exercise would be one step. Also reducing your HDL. Limit the foods in saturated fat or trans fat. Limit fast food, limit junk foods. Limit the foods with cholesterol. Avoid overeating, because the more fat we have in the body, the more cholesterol our liver is going to have to make. We want to lower stress, so doing something fun, doing yoga, exercise, any type of stress relief will help with lowering your cholesterol. And then eliminating unnecessary drugs, such as alcohol, tobacco, or other, even prescription drugs might impact our cholesterol. So these are some things we can do if you know someone that has high cholesterol. How can we help them? Get them to move, get them to be active to try to increase their HDL, and then according to what the slide says, do some of these things to try to limit their LDL. And this is just a funny slide to show you how to increase our HDL. One thing that I get questioned on all the time is, can we eat something with HDL in it? And the answer really is no, not at this point in time. But what we can do with our diet is eat a high fiber diet. The high amounts of fiber in the human body will minimize or lower our lousy cholesterol or LDL. So the foods that you're eating maybe are claiming, well, that if you eat this food, it will decrease your cholesterol. That's due to the fiber in the food. And things like Cheerios, whole grains have claimed to eat one type of food to lower cholesterol, and that's because of the fiber in them. One thing I could say is research has shown the best food to eat to minimize LDL is whole oats. So eating oatmeal in the morning, maybe even 2 times per day, will decrease the LDL. And I want to end this presentation by saying fat is great. Fat is very healthy if we eat the right types of fat. And this slide shows you some colorful options. Naturally colorful foods are great, but colorful options for the polyunsaturated fats that are very healthy to our brain, our nervous system, and our heart. In fact, the American Heart Association wants us to eat at least 2 servings of healthy fats per week, but I'm trying to recommend at least 1 serving per day if possible. Colorful fish, nuts, seeds, whole olives, seaweed if possible, and dark green leafy vegetables as well. We'll have a little bit amount. Remember, the highest amount will be found in flaxseed, sea vegetables, and then colorful fish.